Welcome to Solutions Rising. I'm Rachel Branch, and I am very pleased to introduce attorney Timothy J. Shugrue, who is also a candidate for Berkshire County District Attorney. Attorney Shugrue is joining me to talk about justice for all, and this is a subject that is important to each and every one of us. Welcome, Attorney Shugrue.
Good morning, Rachel. It's nice to see you. Yes, call me Tim. That's what I prefer to go by.
Usually I start off the show and say, would you just tell whatever you would like about your life and your background? And
That'd be wonderful. I'm 62 years of age. I'm married with my wife, Joanne. We've been married for 21 years. I grew up in the Berkshires. I moved here in 1973 when I was 13 years old. I went to junior high school in Crosby and Pittsfield, and I went to Taconic. I was very involved. I was a class president there. I played on the football team. And most importantly, I began to become involved in the radio station, WTBR. And, yes, I was the president and general manager of WTBR from 1975 to 1978. And in that period of time, I got my FCC license, and we raised $7,000, and we were able to purchase the tower for WTBR. At that time, it was first called WTHS, and we ended up turning it over because WTHS had already had call letters in the eastern part of the United States, so we did WTBR, which stood for Taconic Broadcasting Radio. So Bob Cooper was our advisor at that time, and I went down to Washington, D.C., and I went to a bunch of other places. I was just 16 and 17 years of age, and we raised the money and put up the tower, and we went FM on October 1st, 1977. This year, WTBR will be 45 years old. What's important about that is that's how I learned how to do nonprofit work. And later on in life, when I started the Kids Place, which we can talk about in a few moments,
we will.
That's what taught me was the Pittsfield school system and how important it was. And we had radio, and we were able to go FM. And so I learned how to run a nonprofit when I was 16 and 17 years of age, which later on in life turned out to be a wonderful thing. So when I graduated from Taconic in 1978, I went on to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where I graduated cum laude with I received dual degrees in political science and in history. And after that, all during this period of time when I was in high school, I was an old cordboard operator. Operator, may I help you? You know, the old, like Lily Tomlin skips, you see, that's what I did.
I did that on Martha's Vineyard one summer.
Did you really? Oh, I did it.
Oh, that was so fun to pull the cords.
I'd be operator, may I help you? This is 1976, 1977. And then in 1978, I became an installer repairman, and I was a union worker for the telephone company. I did that in the winter times and summer times when I was off from college. And when I graduated from University of Massachusetts, I couldn't afford to go to law school, so I took a year and a half off, and I climbed telephone poles. I was an installer repairman, a union card holder of IBEW, and I worked that way, saved up money, and I went to law school and graduated in 1986. And I became, immediately, on my third year as a law student, I was hired by the Hampden County District Attorney's Office, Matthew J. Ryan at the time, who was the district attorney. And when I graduated, I was hired by them immediately. And once I passed the bar, in December of 1986, I was moved to the Superior Court, and I started prosecuting child abuse and rape cases. Yeah, that was in 1986. We had a major change in the laws in the United States regarding caregivers reporting child abuse. So the criminal justice system got inundated with it. So we became the founders. There was one of 6 areas in the country, Springfield was one of them, that received a justice grant, and we started to prosecute child abuse cases. So that became really, really dear to my heart. I was 27 years old when I tried my first rape case in the Superior Court in Hampden County. I have literally tried hundreds and hundreds of trials. In my first 2 years, I had over 23 Superior Court rape cases and sexual assault cases and child abuse cases that I did in the city of Springfield. Once I began to do that, I was dealing with children on a daily basis. And children are a really important part of my life. And you'll see when we talk a little bit later how it's been interwoven into my career and into my life, how much I've worked with children and women over domestic violence and sexual assault cases.
You and I have not met before this program. We talked, and of course I had told you personally how close to my heart and the horrible experience I have and so many women and girls and children have had. But I had no idea about your background, and thank you for using the word rape, because it's
not a dirty word.
And it's a 4-letter word that needs to be said out loud.
That is so important, because one of the first things we did when I started the Kids Place was that, and we're going to get into that in a moment, is that it was awareness meant everything. And so most people, I've never promoted myself, so I've never done that. I'm having to do this because of the campaign. I didn't do this to get promotion. I didn't get this to get personal gain. I was prosecuting these cases because I saw little children that were 5 and 6 years old that had to testify in front of either a parent, a caregiver, or aunt or uncle, and it was really difficult. And my heart bled for these children. And I saw some horrific, really, really awful physical abuse cases where immersion burns, where people put children in boiling water. I saw, there's so many awful cases. So it was a very difficult job, but I grew the passion because of the children, the courage that little kids have. But our system didn't work at the time because we didn't have the opportunity to treat children with the trauma the way they needed to be treated. So Dr. Bailey, who was a pediatrician in Springfield at the time, we started, him and I and a bunch of other individuals from DCF and whatnot, started what's called SANE, Sexual Abuse Intervention Network. That started out of Springfield, Massachusetts. Many people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it started out of there. Ed Bailey was the one. I was lucky enough to work with Ed Bailey. We began to do what's called a multi-team approach to child abuse. We saw a real problem prosecuting these cases and the trauma children went through. And we also knew that abusers had been, more likely than not, had been abused themselves. So we wanted to sort of break that cycle. The only way to do that was we had to, first off, let's ease the trauma for a child. So we got into a situation at the hospital. We got a room with a one-way mirror, and then we would interview the children with a forensic interviewer, and nobody else would be in there. Because I was interviewing children in police stations in Springfield. Can you imagine how dirty and awful? And they're little 6, 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old children having to go through that. So we realized there was a way to do that. Additionally to that, we ended up getting them therapists, and then having a medical examination. We bought a colposcope, which is a non-intrusive examination for a child that doesn't require too much contact with the child. And we also dealt with social services and getting the non-abused caregiver some help as well. So when I left there and Ed Bailey left, it sort of shut down because there was nobody there. I continued to prosecute child abuse in Springfield until Gerard Downey got elected in DA in Pittsfield. And at that time, I met Daniel Ford, who was a Superior Court judge, and he was from Pittsfield. I tried his very first case as a judge, as a prosecutor, on a child sexual assault case, and I won. The funny part is that in 2019, he's from Pittsfield, and I tried his very last Superior Court case as a judge, as a defense lawyer, and I won. And I had hundreds of trials in between there in front of many judges down in Springfield, including him. But he convinced me, why don't you go back to Berkshire County? So at that time I did. I met with Gerard Downey. I said, one of the things that, Jerry, I wanted to do if I come up here, I want to be able to start the kids' place. And I want to know if I could have your backing to do that. And he did. And so when I moved up here, I met Joseph Collius, who was a Pittsfield police detective. He was running Citizens Against Child Abuse at the time. And that was an organization that was already in place. So it helped me because we had a group of volunteers who were already there. So, but Joe and I had to go out and we won a couple of big cases. It was an awful, awful child abuse case with dogs and children. It was just an awful case. But we received a sentence, convicted him, received a sentence of 72 to 108 years. At that time, it was the largest sentence in the United States. So we were in the New York Times, we're in the LA Times, so it was very popular. Then I tried the Lanesboro bus driver case. I don't know if you remember that from years ago. A bunch of children were abused on a bus in Lanesboro, which we got a conviction on that and got double life. That gave the awareness was coming out. So a bunch of radio stations started doing my ads on there, just PSAs, public service announcements, that was saying, children are, 40% of our population, but 100% of our future. So we were getting the message across. So in 1993, I had gone down, I'd been teaching for the National College of District Attorneys Association as well, for child abuse and for openings and closings. And I was traveling around the country. Well, I went to Huntsville, Alabama, and Bud Kramer, who was the founder of these programs, had an advocacy center established. It was in Huntsville, Alabama. And Huntsville is very similar to Berkshire County. Berkshire County at that time was mostly generated employment was GE. They had NASA. And they were a middle-class area just like us in the hills of Alabama. So it was almost identical to Berkshire County. When I saw the program they had, I brought it back here. And I incorporated it in 1993. And then in 1995, myself and Paul Paracci, who later became Judge Paracci of the juvenile court, he was a lawyer at the time.
What I understand, very dedicated to justice for children.
Justice for children, wonderful human being. God rest his soul.
I've heard that. I didn't know him. I might have met him, but I didn't know him.
A beautiful man. He did Shakespeare in the courts.
I know about Shakespeare in the courts.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man. In any event, him and I took a great risk, and we personally guaranteed. We had a private donor that wanted a guarantor on a $140,000 loan to buy the house. So him and I personally guaranteed that note on the house. So we both of us took a little bit of a financial risk. We ended up buying the Red Cross building on Wendell Avenue, And we then, I was able to get in touch with the GE Elephants, which was a retired group of GE people, and a lot of local contractors in business, Cheney Construction, Stevens Carpets, and we came to did an old Amish one-day bond raising, and we redid the Wendell Avenue property into the Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center. That was in 1995. We hired our executive director, and that's been in operations for 27 years, and that's my baby, and I'm proud of that. I have never promoted that before. I've never talked about it because that wasn't the reason why I did it. But I bring it up now just because I want people to know, back then I was told you could never get these things done.
Well, so often I say in so many things, these are lifetime commitments.
They are.
You don't come in and walk away and you keep doing that work. But for child abuse, and since you're talking about Kids Place, if you would tell the framework of how a child is interviewed so that they are not re-traumatized. That's great.
Let me tell you really what the Kids Place does is just so multifaceted. That was the whole idea of it. So now a child comes in, and there's 3 different types of rooms with different, for age-appropriate rooms. So that it's a child-friendly room, and then there's a mirror there, but it's obviously a one-way mirror, and they can't see the people that are behind there. So if it's potentially a crime, there's the police that are there. It could be state police, it could be local police. DCF is definitely there because they're checking in to do their investigation, because DCF has to do an investigation, the police have to do an investigation, and it involves a child. We have a forensic interviewer that's been trained how to interview a child so they don't lead them, we don't get false accusations, we get true disclosures, and because a false accusation is just as bad as an abuser.
Yes.
So we make sure that gets done right. And so everybody that's there, we have a victim witness advocate, they all view that from behind a one-way mirror, and the police officer takes notes, and then they can reduce the writing and the statement the child makes to a report. And what we offer on top of that is either a nurse practitioner or a doctor to examine the child, so that happens, and then there's also, again, therapy available for the child and for the parents. It's also now expanded to domestic violence cases, so now it's not just a child, Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center, regarding children, it's also in the Domestic Violence Center as well. So we have services for domestic violence with Elizabeth Freeman Center, who have an office in there, and as well we're dealing with the children. So they get therapy right off the bat, because we know, again, like I said, we want to break that cycle so that we get children into therapy so we don't have this continuous abuse cycle continuing. So that all gets met in the child's needs. They don't stop when the case stops. They get to continue with their therapy for as long as is necessary. And literally, there's been probably thousands that have been there in the 27 years that's been in operation. It's a wonderful facility. I'm very proud that I brought that to Berkshire County. And I bring that up because I have a lot of other ideas about how to do things. I've always been involved in the community, even though I've been running my own business. Now, when the Kids Place was actually completed, I was in private practice by then. I was no longer practicing in the DA's office, no longer a prosecutor. I did that all in my own time. At my own effort and my own risk, and it took off and it survived. So
which I think is required of a real community member.
It is. It's just so many.
This is part of something I'm very concerned about these days is the loss of the sense of community.
It's true, and we've got to get that sense of community back. And first, it all started with awareness. That's what I want to do with mental health now. So we got to get people aware of the mental health issues that we have. It starts with awareness, number one, and then you move into trying to expand the services, and then try to bring programs in. I want to bring a mental health court to Berkshire County so that we treat mental health individuals different in the criminal justice system if we have a mental health court. When I came back, like I said, when I came back to Pittsfield, I did other types of crimes that I was prosecuting. And then eventually I left and opened my own practice. And for 28 years now, so I've been in the courtroom for 36 years. And the courtroom's my home. I've tried literally hundreds of trials. It's my home field advantage, let's put it that way. I've been in there so long, I know the laws, I know the rules of evidence. I'm an excellent trial lawyer. But I also learned in the last 28 years the problems with addictions and the problem with mental health and the problems that we have individuals that come in there. For 28 years, I've been dealing with people of all different backgrounds, all different, I represent people, lots of people of color who've faced inequities and injustices, and I've helped them get justice and helped them get through the process. I represent people who've been charged with murder, I represent people who've been charged with all sorts of crimes, whether it's small addiction problems, but I've been dealing with people on a daily basis and their families and understanding the sympathy that's required. This balance of justice that you have next to you, it's important. I have the Lady Justice behind my desk and oversees me every day because we have to be compassionate. I call it, you need confidence in the district attorney's office, you need competency in the district attorney's office, which means experience. But you need the confidence, you need law enforcement have to know that they can go to that district attorney and have the faith to get answers from them. But at the same time, they need compassion. So you need compassion so that you deal with the inequities and the injustices that people see. Years ago, we would see people would be so biased against someone's sexuality. And we're seeing that being more accepted, which it should have been a long time ago. But we've had to fight those in the courtroom. Same with race, same with gender issues. You know, women still aren't treated the same as men.
Oh,
so it's so true. But we
the
have to
assault
fight
on women worldwide and nationally is
statistics.
frightening right now.
It's really frightening.
Yes.
And what we need to do is, but I've dedicated my life to doing that, both as a prosecutor and then as a defense lawyer. I've worked for people's gender rights. I've worked for race rights and making sure that people aren't treated unequally. Economic status, how people are treated differently based upon the amount of income that they make. And clearly someone's sexuality, which has no one's business, and the government has no business being in there. I don't understand. When love is love, love is love. I don't understand that. But we've been fighting that. I can tell you, I was down a few years ago, the Supreme Court passed a beautiful law that made anybody's sexuality was protected. And so I was in North Carolina, and I flew a rainbow flag, my wife and I. And I'm at my neighbor's house, and we're on the ocean, we're on the beach, and I'm at my neighbor's house a few doors down there, and we're in North Carolina. And somebody actually came up on my deck and ripped my flag down. And I was 3 houses away, we couldn't get down there to catch him. But that's still the bias and the awfulness that we see in the community. I'm proud to live in Massachusetts because I think we're much more progressive and much more involved in the community, and we don't allow that type of behavior.
Except that I could refute that right here, being in North Adams, because of my last name coming from my second husband, who was a man of color.
That's still an issue.
Seeing racial profiling inside the gates of the North Adams Library that my family gave to the city. So I've seen misogyny and sexism and racism in North Adams. And
absolutely, but that's why we have to continually fight
that.
Yes,
that's why I keep standing up.
You have to, and that's why for 28 years representing all sorts of people, no matter what their economic status is, no matter what their sexuality, no matter what their gender is, no matter what their race is, because justice is supposed to be blind, but unfortunately it's not always that way. So we have to continue to fight that. But at the same time, we also need to do aggressive prosecution about real criminals. So there's two parts to it: aggressive prosecution, going after guns, going after gang members, going after drug dealers, and going after sexual assaults, people that rape children, people that rape women, people that domestic violence, and then at the same time balancing.
And men also are rape victims.
Oh, absolutely.
And also little boys. So it is pervasive.
It is pervasive. You know, when I started to do child abuse prosecution, Pittsfield was number 9 in the state. North Adams was number 2. Is listed as amount of disclosures that we had for child abuse. Now, some of it I think is distorted because I think we had a better reporting system, so more were being reported. But it was just astronomical how much we had. We saw a great reduction of that once we started prosecuting those crimes and also getting the children through the trauma in that process. But don't get me wrong, that's never going away. We still have to continue to fight that. And when I continue to fight biases, my point is that I think that at least we need to keep that in the forefront, and I think our community has a tendency to do that. We can't let that go. We got to keep talking about what people do, the injustices and the inequalities that happens. But at the same time too, we also have to make our community safe, and we have to make sure that we aggressively prosecute the individuals that are ruining our neighborhoods and ruining our community and keeping jobs and businesses away because of the drugs and because of the crime. So it's
but also I think part of it, Tim, is connecting the dots. When you talk a bit about income inequality and you talk about poverty and then you talk about child abuse and sexual abuse and rape, and when you talk about all that, you have to go to the root causes that bring that forward. And of course now with income inequality growing exponentially.
It is.
The neighborhoods that have become resegregated actually have to be dealt with, and if nothing else, bring it forward to start the process of recognizing and finding a way to heal.
That's right.
And it starts on the local level. I've said this for years.
It starts.
You have to go locally and work up to it.
It starts with every individual.
Yes.
I mean, people say, what can you do? I think I've proved one person can do something by starting the kids' place.
Yes.
It all starts within. I'm not looking nationally. I'm looking at our own community with us here. I want to start with our own neighbors, our own people, and let's make sure that we grow it and then recognize and eliminate those issues that exist, you know, everywhere else. We still have the availability to do that because we're still a small community.
Yeah.
We can treat our cases individually because every case that comes through the court system is just like every person. They're subjective. It's like their own DNA. Every case is different, so we need to treat everybody equally and the same, but also recognizing every single case is different. And we do that as a community. That's why I think it's so important about community outreach. We need our county to work together as a community to resolve these problems, to fix this problem, and to tackle the crime problem.
But I think also with all your years of experience, especially in the areas you've just discussed, you know that everybody who comes to you, even those charged criminally, are vulnerable.
They're vulnerable.
They're all vulnerable.
I tell
you, so many traumatized.
So many traumatized. And that's what I think I bring really into this, into the county, and what I would bring to this office is that I've been in the arena. I've been in the game. I've been in the courtroom. I've been dealing with these cases for 36 years. I have the experience to know what people go through during the criminal justice system. I know what it's like for people to have to go. I know people that have just fallen by the wayside for a time being that we can help become off drugs, help get productive, get them into jobs, and make them a productive member of our society. I've been doing that for 28 years. I've had very little recidivism from my clients because I've worked with them getting off addictions. I've worked with them with the mental health issues because sometimes it's a matter of getting the right doctor for someone who's got a mental health issue that needs to get the proper medication. Sometimes it's the addiction. They just need the help, someone to get them through and make sure they stay in that program to get off drugs, to break that cycle, and then they become, you know, employed and productive, and we all win. And right now, unfortunately, the current administration just dismisses cases. If it's a drug case or it's a larceny case, they just dismiss it without any services. I think that's an injustice. I think if we get someone that's caught with drugs, that what we do is we keep the case open, you charge them, you don't have to get a conviction, but you use the services through the probation department and through our community, and you make sure they get the services to get off drugs. You give them the resources to help do that, and then you'll see, I've seen it happen, if someone gets clean from drugs, they want to get to work, they want the esteem and the self-worth, and it happens. But you can't just kick the can down the road. You must attack that. And we have the availability because we have a statute. It's called Chapter 276, Section 87.
What is that again?
It's Chapter 276, Section 87. It's our pretrial diversion program, probationary pretrial diversion program. And when the Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2018 was passed, it allowed courts now not to just use, you know, community corrections and the programs that they had. They allow all sorts of programs. If you bring them into court, they can accept all different types of programs that didn't exist before. That let's say if I'm a lawyer and I represent somebody and I find a program that's good for my client, the court will accept that. So it's a responsibility we have as a community to give people.
And the responsibility the community has also is we have to strengthen and really build safety net programs.
We definitely
And I
do.
see that having been a foster parent for respite care for 23 children that came in my home,
Right.
and those children have been, this was intensive foster care. These are children who've been sexually assaulted or traumatized by violence, or both. And
Right.
the safety nets in our foster care system are not what they need to be.
It's unfortunate.
And that's a community problem
It's
that
a
needs to
community
be solved.
problem. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of people not wanting to become a foster parent because of some of the scrutiny that they must go through. And I've seen so many wonderful foster parents who've raised 22, 23 children that spent their whole lives doing that. That's so necessary. And it's a real big heart to become a foster parent. It takes a lot of patience and effort, and especially as you're talking about, when you bring in children that have been really seriously abused or seriously
I didn't know that
neglected.
was a separate definition, intensive.
Yeah.
What did I care? They were children.
They were
I'd always
children.
wanted children and didn't have any, and I just loved these children.
Yeah,
and they, of course, they didn't know what happened to me, but I could look them in the eye, and they would look me in the eye, and they knew they could trust me, and they all opened up, which
That's the bond.
amazed me. You get them to open up, but you also find out what they care about.
That's right, because it's about listening.
And then go,
It's about listening. A lot of times we don't listen to children, so you've got to listen to them. And I don't mean just their voices. You listen to their actions and how they're reacting, how they're acting out. What are they doing? Are they changing their personality? There's just so many parts of it. And as a foster parent, you get to see that. But the reward you give back to these children is incredible. So I just hope that we can get more people to continue continue to do foster care because there's such a need in this community, and there's so many children that need there. And we're finding out also, as well as the probate and family court is being inundated now with cases that our grandparents are raising their grandkids because of the addiction problem. And it's really hard for people. But I would say, years ago, we would see maybe 2 guardianship cases a year. Now there's hundreds of guardianship cases a year of grandparents that are raising their grandchildren because of addiction problems.
And they need support.
And they need support, and we don't have a lot of support that's given them. And it's very difficult, people that are in their 60s now raising, 6, 7, 8-year-old children, and it's not an easy process. But I am proud of the people that do that, because you see these people that come in that care about their families, because the family unit is still very important. Yes. It doesn't have to be an intact family, but it's
I call them chosen family. I have a lot of chosen family, and all those children are my chosen family. We're coming near the end of part 1. No, I am delighted, and I want to continue this. We're going to do a part 2.
Right.
For this segment, what would your final words like to be on part 1?
Well, on part 1, I just want to make sure that we have the most important election coming up is on September 6th in 2022. It's the day after Labor Day. So obviously that brings a lot of concern. We have worked very hard, been in the community now for, I'm going on the campaigns over 4 months, and we've got still a long way to go. It's still 5.5 weeks to go. Yeah. Actually 5 weeks.
From the day we're taping this.
Yeah,
so
5
this will
weeks.
Be going on.
So
but I think we need to remember that there's early voting from September
August 27th.
August 27th to September 2nd. There's mail-in voting.
Yes.
And if you're Republican, you have to change your party affiliation if you want to vote in the Democratic Party, and the unaffiliated can pick a Democratic ballot,
and
but it doesn't change your affiliation.
Right. A new thing this year, if you register as a Republican, you change to an independent. When you leave the polling booth, you stay as an independent.
Yes.
You don't become a Democrat like it used to be. So now you can keep your status as an independent.
Yes.
So anybody that's a Republican or anybody who hasn't registered, you can register as independent and vote in this race.
Yeah, you just have to say which ballot you want.
Yes, we're on the Democratic ballot.
It's the only ballot. Yes, there is no Republican ballot in this. That's why this election is so important.
It's the only chance to vote. This is it. On September 6th, that's the end.
Yes.
So whoever you vote for in that time is going to go forward for the next 4 years. So it's imperative.
Here we go, right into part 2. And if each one of us picked up one problem and solved it, imagine the incredible view we would all have of solutions rising. Please be part of the solution and join us in part 2 with attorney Timothy J. Shugrue, who's going to be our next district attorney.
Thank you, Rachel.